My Staff connects the right people in the right companies. Fast, friendly, and focused on results. From temporary staffing to executive recruitment, the My Staff team knows Nebraska business and delivers a job done right. Are you dreading leadership retirements in the next year or so? Don't scramble. Plan ahead with Brad Jones and My Staff. They've helped dozens of companies find C-suite successors who lead with confidence. Visit mystaff.com to power your next leadership hire. Whatever your hiring need or career move, My Staff is your employment partner for a job done right. Visit mystaff.com or call 402-614-1441. Because at My Staff, we're not just recruiters, we're partners in your success story.
Welcome back to HR Wine Bar. Today, we're excited to talk about surviving the wild, wild west of HR.
Where the laws change faster than happy hour specials. Cheers.
Cheers.
So HR compliance is a major issue for all of us nationwide at the SHRM level. Specific to Nebraska, because we have a couple major things happening. And then right down to the local level, there are some folks working in local places that are changing individual areas within states and within chapters that folks are having to deal with compliance things. I'm thinking specifically about Colorado and New York City and those types of things. And so what I've noticed, Jamie, is that over my HR career, compliance has gone from, kind of an evolutionary change that kind of happens slowly over time.
Mm-hmm.
When I go back through and look at laws, you'll have a few things change that are major events, but spread out by a few years.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last few years have gotten very reactionary with some major dramatic swings, many of which are tied to a change in administration and a change back and a change forward and a change, to the point that evolution to reaction is now acceleration. The change is just coming at us with a swiftness, and it feels very wild, wild westy. Like I'm thinking of the Wild West song in my head. Also fighting with the Will Smith version.
Is that the Will Smith version? Okay. Yep. We're
No,
tracking.
that's the
You had a different
I'll have to
Wild
look.
West
I'll
version.
have to look it up. It's a generational thing. It's from the 80s. I'll have to go back and look it up. But these timelines, we used to have periods of repose where we could implement and then come up for air. And since the COVID times when we had new rules appearing on the daily between the CDC and state level organizations and politics changes and all of those types of things, to now politics, courts, states, the technology is changing at an uncanny pace. I'm finding it really difficult. Difficult's the wrong word, but I'm finding it to be very important to stay ahead of the curve in all of these facets, and I feel very spread thin, right? Compliance is not a slow march. It's a sprint in multiple different areas, right?
100%. And the information comes so fast that we can only process so much information at a time. And right now it seems like we are just in a constant state of which comes first, what's most important, what's the most urgent of these, and trying to navigate how it impacts things down the line and what we need to change or not change. And it's overwhelming, to be quite honest.
So one of those things, just this week, in fact, we've had the nationwide ban on non-competes from 2024 was struck down this week. So it's September right now. We dropped this episode in November, but that's just the newest thing. I'm not in my company right now. I don't have to deal with non-competes, but there are a number of HR folks out there. And as co-chairs, you and I, for the Government Affairs Committee, That's a topic we need to make sure that we have in our file system, our mental file system for any other job that may come up down the road in our career,
Absolutely.
right? We can't just let it go because it doesn't apply now, right?
Right.
We have, I remember in GAC, our Department of Labor overtime threshold and the back and forth that goes clear back to the first Obama term when they tried to initiate a new threshold and it was struck down, and then we brought them forward and we implemented for for July 1, and
Literally, yes.
then literally, and then right after that, the January 1 was rolled back.
Right.
And so we have this back and forth going there. We have just this year, federal administration, as part of, I think it was part of the Big Beautiful Bill Act, that the administration wanted to put a 10-year moratorium on any state regulations around artificial intelligence. Right. And now that didn't make it into the bill. And so that's just three. That's
Yeah.
just three things that
Right.
kind of have gone back and forth,
Right.
that have had me on pause to go, okay, slow down. Let's think through, work through, go back and do the history
Right.
of
Well, and
all of these
also
things.
when you start thinking about, to your point, it's like we were there, right? We were July 1st, we had this thing we're doing, and we've already done all the work to get there and implement and change our policies. There's a ripple effect that happens when those things backtrack, and then you have to go back and recall what I think we're talking about this a little bit later, but kind of where else does this apply, or where does that language need to change, or what documents do we need to update, and make sure that our managers, our leaders, our teams are aware of what those changes may impact or not impact, and what's maybe already been communicated or
You're
should be
you're
retracted in communication, or there's a ripple effect that
you're so lovely, because I was just trying to get myself in line, and you were taking the next pragmatic step in wrapping other people into the conversation around these topics. I hadn't even gone that step yet.
well, my brain was like leaping ahead. I think I'm still stuck in HIFWA because I was just looking at policies today that are supplemental, but also have ripple effects of our language needed to
Right.
match here and here, or not. This needs to be taken out, or different things need to apply, and it's a constant
Yeah.
struggle.
Yeah. And the other piece is that we're starting to see what I call cautionary tales, right? Of folks who didn't quite stay up on the topic. I'm thinking of a conference that I attended where, someone in a pretty high, a good sized organization and pretty high up in HR, was asking questions about the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. And the question was basically, well, what's that?
Mhm.
And my thought was, oh, friend, that's been in effect for 8 months,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so the importance of staying ahead of all these curves,
Mhm.
the cautionary tales just kind of keep coming.
Mhm.
Um, Workday had an AI situation. Workday is a tech company, right? An HRAS, and they had an AI situation, that went into a lawsuit that I think is still happening, and a federal judge has allowed like a nationwide collective action lawsuit,
Mhm.
against Workday. They've allowed it, that basically opens up any kind of tech vendor that has an AI piece in their product,
Mhm.
that if that AI hallucinates, and
Mhm.
which is the term, right?
Goes rogue.
Hallucinates,
Mhm.
goes rogue, and gives
Mhm.
bad information to an employee, then that vendor that supplied the tech to the employer
Mhm.
can also be held liable for discrimination or those types of things. And so that's a whole new field
Mhm.
that goes beyond us as HR people.
Mhm.
when right onto the vendor. And so these
Mhm.
types of things um, are coming at us with a swiftness,
Right.
and we need to be on deck handling them.
Yeah. Well, in AI, I mean, something that's a little bit adjacent to our normal HR purview, right? It falls more in that tech category, but we're going to be partnering with that group and that team to figure out, okay, what does this look like from true protections, but then also our uh, CEOs and our leadership team to what's our practices as a company? What are we okay with? When it comes to
Mhm.
not just the legalities of it, but what's our usage and what are our policies around having our information put into these types of systems.
Exactly, and when folks have not, and I'm not saying that I have, but when folks have not dug into the specifics of,
Mhm.
um, open AI versus closed AI,
Mhm.
and the implications of how your data is out in the world in those
Mhm.
2 different environments, and I'm not a tech person, I can't speak to the specifics of that,
Right.
but that's even a question that some leadership doesn't even understand that there's a difference.
Mhm. Right.
So, if HR and IT security, data security, right? If you work in a small company, I don't even have an IT person, we
Mhm.
outsource that.
Mhm.
And so how do we design policy
Mhm.
that meets the need, protects the company, protects the employee data, the
Mhm.
business data, all of those types of things, and doesn't put us in a situation where we
Mhm.
can be subject to a lawsuit
Mhm.
like Workday, or like the employer who used Workday, I'm sure is wrapped up in that in some way or
Absolutely.
another. But
Yeah.
that class action piece, collective
Mhm.
action piece is a major event
Mhm.
in this space.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and
So there's
it's ever changing too, right? Like maybe a year from now it will look different in our education that we have to do for our team members too. I think the compliance piece of like getting our policies in line is one side of it, and then we've also got this other side where we have to educate our managers and leaders and our workforce to ensure they know how that's going into practice and
well,
where are their gaps in their education of it too.
well, there are gaps, yes, but then we have to come to consensus
Yeah.
about what we're going to do. So we have to, when it comes to AI specifically, it's a little broader because it's still so much unknown for all of us. We have to get the same education about the topic.
Mhm.
Then, and when it's an open field and there is no legal precedent, there are no laws sitting out there. In fact, there's a push to have no laws around it,
Mhm.
right? I'm like, we rely on those laws to help us guide business and to help us advise our leadership and to help us write
Mhm.
policy. So we need those things in place to keep the guardrails on and to keep us in
Mhm.
a place where we can advise appropriately. So
Mhm.
AI is a wide open field and probably not the best example because that is truly wild, wild west. But
Mhm.
there's lots of other stuff out there too.
Mhm. And definitely a reality for us that we're juggling every day because I think the use is only going to become more as we head into future of HR and how it can help us be more efficient too. So interesting sometimes when we think about the risk that we have to manage as HR and maybe what, you know, we are navigating from a liability standpoint that may not be seen by others.
My Staff connects the right people and the right companies. Fast, friendly, and focused on results. From temporary staffing to executive recruitment, the My Staff team knows Nebraska business and delivers a job done right. When it comes to corporate staffing, Stephanie Todd gets it done. She's been in your seat. as a talent acquisition specialist, HR generalist, and business partner, and now she's putting that experience to work for you. Email Stephanie at mystaff.com today. Whatever your hiring need or career move, MyStaff is your employment partner for a job done right. Visit mystaff.com or call 402-614-1441. Because at MyStaff, we're not just recruiters, we're partners in your success story.
Oh, it's definitely not.
Mhm.
HR is the fun police, remember? That's
right.
our only
Yes.
job, is to be the
Yes.
fun police.
Are the fun
And
police.
but then to organize the employee events, because we're the fun police organizing the fun.
And also the fun people. Yeah.
But also the people in charge of the fun? No.
Mhm.
No.
Mhm.
I'm thinking, you had touched on it earlier, but the cross-pollination of
Mhm.
policies and how they kind of interweave, and the Healthy Families Workplaces Act here in Nebraska.
Mhm.
Now that we're finally implementing that, if
Mhm.
you have not been up on that, Nebraska
Mhm.
HR people, your deadline to notify was September 15th, and your implementation deadline was October 1. So make sure you're up on that. There's lots of information and resources out there for you. But as I was going through the rewrite of my paid time off policy, it
Mhm.
then bled over into, how do we consider attendance? And it then bled over into, what is appropriate notice, right? And so in my handbook, I had to go to multiple different places. I couldn't just slap the law in there and say, check done. It needed to be commingled with all of the other information that was that's already in the document, and it needs to be merged in appropriately. And there needs to be training, to your point, Miss Jamie,
Yep. My
making
favorite
sure
part.
making sure our frontline managers know what's what
Mhm.
and are answering things appropriately.
Yeah. It's almost, when you have to cross-pollinate, as you reference so many policies, it's almost a really good idea at that point just to kind of go back through a holistic review of your handbook with managers, because there is a lot of times crossover, and maybe we have to provide different prompts on, here's, if this happens, here's, what's appropriate to say, or hey, maybe this is something you just need to immediately elevate to HR if it crosses, into certain areas of, I guess areas we don't want our managers maybe navigating, but we want to maintain compliance, and we want to make sure that they understand what that looks like too. All right, Amy. So what is one compliance mistake that you've seen explode recently?
Oh, I have to go back to the salary threshold question.
Right.
Right. In GAC, Government Affairs with Human Resource Association of the Midlands, a couple of
Mhm.
months ago, we were having a conversation with the folks on our call about um, the changes that we had anticipated happening and the back and forth of that. And so I remember
Mhm.
posing a question to them that was specifically about,
Mhm.
hey, you've just learned that your employee Jordan is a salaried project manager, and she's earning $45,000 a
Uh-huh.
year. Like, what do you do next?
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? And then I remember putting up a bunch of options, and basically the answer came out, you need to consult legal counsel, because the back and forth had gone so far that with the July 1 threshold at, I think it was like $44,000 is where it's
Mhm.
sitting, 43,888,
Mhm.
I think, that Jordan no longer meets that threshold, and that the wage should go up, but it's still less than the January 1 that was rolled back. And so um our advising attorney had kind of walked us through what the answer to that question would have been through through
Mhm.
time, right?
Mhm.
And he talked about the what he called the Chevron era,
Mhm.
which is where the courts were Chevron deference basically is the court saying, you know what, this can be deferred to the federal agency that's in charge of overseeing the guidance on it. And so the courts would just throw it back to the agency. Well, Loper Bright took Chevron deference away and said, well, the agencies don't really have any power here. Okay. So Chevron deference goes away. We're post Loper Bright, which happened right at the same time. It was the end of June, right before that salary threshold was to take hold from the Department of Labor. And so if we don't have Chevron deference and the Department of Labor is telling us this is the threshold, what do we do?
We're back in the Wild Wild West.
We're back in the Wild Wild West, right?
Recruiting squirrels at this point.
Right. My squirrels are at a rave. I cannot get them in a row. Not at all. And so then we had in June, I think this is when we had this conversation, we had Trump versus CASA, which was lowering the court's ability to, or their authority to make nationwide injunctions. Right? So Loper Bright is kind of a nationwide injunction to do away with Chevron deference. So now we used to defer to the agency, but now Chevron deference goes away. Loper Bright says, nope, we're not deferring to the agency. But then CASA says the courts don't have the right to do that. And so are we deferring to the agency, right? And CASA was specific to Texas. So Texas is unique, and it's just so convoluted. It's so convoluted. And so the question had a different answer based on various points in time. And that the explosion of the information and the back and forth and the pat answer from an attorney, no matter what question you ask them, which is also what should be the HR responses.
Right.
Well, it depends. It depends. And so now the it depends has just gotten a whole lot more complicated. And so I feel like that's the major explosive example I can give to answer your question, but it's not the only one. But it's definitely the one that had us all over the place in June this year.
Right. And starting to think about, okay, again, that ripple effect, how is it going to impact the way we've been doing things, or where does that impact, fall in other areas of our business, or what is actually going to be impacted by the things that we were able to look to before that maybe we aren't now, and the guidance is a lot less clear.
Yeah, it's a very diplomatic way of saying that. The guidance is a lot less clear.
Maybe non-existent. I don't know, but it depends. That's our favorite answer.
Yeah. In the end, though, we're responsible to know.
We are.
I had a conversation this morning with a retired HR director who's not really, it's a friend and a colleague. She's in her 70s and she worked for a financial institution somewhere here in Omaha. I don't recall which one, but we have lunch every once in a while. And she's been out of the business for at least a dozen years. And she said, I was always so thankful we had legal in-house. Just saying, here's the thing. The reality is that most of us don't have that. Every time we pick up the phone for legal counsel, we are paying hourly billable. And so we're always looked to as the first stop. And we've always been able to be counted on to be the first stop. And sometimes I feel like that's a very precarious position to be in right now. So we're not gunslingers, Wild West. If anything, we're walking into the saloon door, going, okay, y'all, calm down and put your guns away.
Mhm. Mhm. Right.
We're just here for a drink, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and some of that goes back to even thinking about, when we're maybe the first source of receiving that information, we're paying attention to these things, we're then sharing it back to our leadership team, and also maybe thinking about some of those initial impacts or, effects that it may have to us as HR professionals or our businesses or the way we do things. And it's also those conversations around our leadership being aware of it and thinking about our cohesive approach. Like, if we are going to have to make a change, what does that look like for all of us? And how are we going to move forward with whatever it is, recognizing that we probably don't have a choice in this matter, right? The legislation has changed or the rules have changed. And how are we going to approach those things as an organization? So you get that buy-in from your leadership team and bringing them into, like, here's what I'm dealing with, and we're going to have to deal with this as an organization, and sometimes there's an approach that's going to have to change, and I need you guys to come with me essentially and help me understand how we are approaching this, and at what point do we need to engage maybe our legal partners to ensure our policies or agreements, things like that that we have are in line. Maybe we haven't updated them for a while, so now this is a great time for us to be thinking about that and budgeting for that, because there's probably a cost associated to engaging with that. But again, in a previous episode we talked about kind of that loneliness factor, and sometimes when these changes are happening so rapid fire and you're trying to sift through all of it too, it's, if you have the opportunity to get that leadership team involved, it can be really helpful in providing some support around navigating as a whole.
Interesting. I love your phrasing about how are we going to move forward,
Mhm.
because the overlay of that is that often we're asked to go find the best practice.
Mhm.
Well, but the best practice out there might not be what's best for us, right? How are
So true.
we going to take this information and move forward?
So true.
And that's a very different conversation than what does the law say and what are we legally required to do to stay in compliance. Those are two very different conversations, and a distinction that I've heard come up in some of our training, specifically around HIFWA here in Nebraska, that it may or may not be a legal question. It might be an HR question and an engagement question and a "Is this a hill you really want to die on?" question.
100%. There's a
Um,
human element as well sometimes in some of these things. Yeah, so let's maybe talk, Amy, about a few ways, since we know we want our teams to also be informed with us, right? What are some ways that we can, or places, I guess, we can find information to keep us up to date? I know you subscribe to several that you can probably share with our group.
I do. I have some favorites, but I think before I share any of those, I think what I want to make sure HR folks are doing is carving out time for their own
Mm,
education and
so true.
edification. Um, I will say that my HR game leveled up when I started holding, I always felt like, well, I'm reading a blog, or I'm watching a video, or I'm a something something at work, and I'm old school that way. I'm handing my paper to the person behind me.
Right.
We're in a different time, and to be in leadership means to be informed. And in this wild, wild west territory we're in right now, there's the onslaught of information and change requires us to carve out that time
Right.
to get informed. And so when I started letting go of whatever, I don't know, whatever I felt I should be doing during that
Mhm.
time, checking my email or
Yeah.
processing payroll or whatever. Um, when I started carving out that time and kind of holding it sacred, that's when when things kind of shifted for me, when my own education, my own going out and getting ahead of the curve really started to gain traction. So, um, I similar to HR Wine Bar, I like a little bit of humor kind of built into my to my
For sure, things can get too
compliance
serious.
updates. So I'm a really uh, big fan of Eric B. Meyer over at the Employer Handbook. His blog
Same.
posts are not only spot on, but they usually have some element of what the actual, some element of
Right.
humor and dismay
Definitely
happening.
polar wild, wild west. There's some wild, wild west scenarios that have you shaking your
Absolutely,
head, like, "How did that even
absolutely.
happen?"
And on his blog, he said, I do speaking engagements, and he puts up 2 pictures. Do you want the bearded Eric or the clean shaven Eric? I mean, he's terrific.
Yes.
And often has drop-in sessions where you can come and watch him do this type of thing. And so I'm a big fan, and I subscribe and I get his emails. Right. They just drop into my inbox and I read the articles every day. Certainly LinkedIn. I'm always combing for kind of culture driven things and the job market and recruiting and those types of pieces. And in the Omaha area specifically, to kind of keep the pulse on what's happening in business in Omaha. Um, Also, the EEOC email newsletter. If you have not signed up for that, definitely go over to the EOC and you're going to get the real content delivered to you. There is a Nebraska news organization, the name of which is escaping me, that I did not write down, that I will pull up at another time and make sure I give them a plug as well. But those are kind of some of
Mhm.
the places that I'm tapped into to
Yeah.
stay informed. How about you?
Well, I second that. I think your initial comment around the intentionality of carving out time, it can be really difficult. Calendars are stacked. You're taking care of others throughout the day, right? You're putting out the fire that's in front of you or the one that's to come. Maybe it's smoldering somewhere else. And you're anticipating that. And so you do really have to be intentional. And one of the things that obviously want to give a plug to Haram, but our monthly chapter programs or the resources, the webinars, maybe it is just 30 minutes. Maybe it's this podcast for you. Maybe it's going to the program, but truly taking that time to absorb those resources and finding the things that speak to you, right? Sometimes there's so much content, there's so many emails that you receive, and there's lots of articles you can read. But to Amy's point, finding the things that really speak to you, maybe it's circumstantial, right? You're seeking something that just happens to come up at the right time, or by being a part of these email groups or even some of our committees, they share information and articles. We do news and noteworthy in GAC each month. And so there's, finding those things that really fit you. There's benefits resources and there's benefits pro partner is one I really like. It gets a little more in the weeds on some of the benefits pieces, but if that's in your wheelhouse, maybe that's something you want to look at spending more time within. So I think it's a mixture of both, but that intentionality is key.
Yeah, I think the way I would phrase that is HR is not passive,
Hmm.
right? If you are being passive in your acquisition of information, that sets you up to be reactionary, which none of
Absolutely.
us wants to be in business. We want to be strategic, and we as HR practitioners need to be out there scouting the information
Yes.
and preparing our organizations for the things that are coming. I'll be the first one to say that I am risk averse. I'm, you know, all evidence to the contrary with our new podcast, but I'm a generally risk averse person when it comes to money and policy, and I want things to be kind of tight and buttoned up. I'm never comfortable just rolling with the punches, but every
You
HR
like the
person.
guardrails. Hmm.
I I absolutely, if I yes, guardrails all the way. So
Same.
yeah.
Truly. Same.
I don't need a law degree, but I definitely need to know enough to keep the saloon from burning down. right? Because there's no insurance for
True.
that. Um,
Absolutely. Mhm.
Jamie, since you mentioned Haram and our programming and committee meetings and those types of things, I think this is a good time for us to give a shout out uh, as a sponsor. Human Resource Association of the Midlands is the reason we're here. We don't exist without them. And our inaugural sponsors, Ellerbrock Norris and my staff. I'm a client of both of those companies, and so I'm more than happy to give a personal shout out to them. Um, but it's important for us to take the time to recognize that this type of endeavor doesn't happen without their support.
Absolutely.
So, Jamie, I think it might be a good idea for us to kind of backtrack. We went through a bunch of like our favorite resources for information to keep us up to date and educated and those types of things. But if we were to break down more like a comprehensive list of places where you
Absolutely.
should be culling information, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, sometimes you got to go straight to the source, right? We look at things like the Department of Labor. Obviously, we saw that with HIFWA and looking at Nebraska Department of Labor website and seeking that guidance direct as kind of that governing body of that particular piece of legislation and the FAQs, things that we knew we were going to need. So, going to the Department of Labor website, the EEOC, same thing, getting that information probably most updated and right from the source in those pieces that we really have to be extremely cognizant about, maybe less gray area in what needs to be in our policies and practices there. Our federal and state websites tied to labor, other places that we might want to search, Amy, any other like Nebraska Works, probably our unemployment um,
Mhm.
websites, trying to think of other local maybe formal resources.
Maybe the business journal,
Mm,
right? If you
mhm.
subscribe to those things. Back to the federal level, though, even the Bureau of Labor and Statistics,
Right.
right? Or the wage, specifically the Wage and Hour Division of Department of
Mhm,
Labor, right?
mhm.
If almost all of those government sites have some kind of newsletter automatic feed. Now, if you
Yes,
sign up for all of them, you're going to get a whole lot of information to call through, but that's kind of what we need right now.
absolutely. Well, and even, thinking about like FMLA and we want the most updated resources, we can go out to the website, we can pull the forms right off the website. Thinking about maybe even the IRS if we've got some tax implications that we're thinking about, or, limits on our FSAs, HSAs, things of that nature. So just being cognizant of what those sources that you're looking at and maybe more
Mhm.
formally too. And feel free to reach out to us too if you have
Yeah,
questions about where to find certain information.
right. Thinking specifically of the overtime changes, taxes on overtime that could be coming. I don't have any specifics yet, but that's a topic of conversation here in early September of, how is that going to be documented? If you're in charge of payroll, like I am, that's probably going to be happening on a 941, and making sure that you have the most updated 941 in your processes is key. Don't let those things go by,
Mm-hmm.
right?
100%. Well, we've certainly made, a recommendation to join your local SHRM chapter. But Haram, of course, we have so many resources available, connections that you can make through your peer groups, that you'll meet through the committees and just attending the meetings. Also, the SHRM website, obviously, hopefully, if you are a SHRM member, you're already taking advantage of those templates, resources, articles. They do a great job with keeping you updated on federal legislation and changes as well that would impact compliance. And of course, we're here, the HR wine bar. You can come
Right?
to us for certain
Your your
meetings.
newest resource for HR information,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
Right? I think it's
Absolutely.
important to think of gathering up your education pieces as a crowdsourcing, right? Bits and pieces here. You're going to find what you latch onto and what speaks to you, like the employer handbook for me, because I need that humor piece. Um, but hey, we don't know all the things, so we'd love it
No.
if you have a resource out there, send it over to us so we can take a peek and see if we want to add it into our oeuvre. There's a 25-cent word for you, our collection of
Our
information.
collective.
Our
Mhm.
collective.
Mhm.
Exactly, exactly.
I love it.
So, Jamie, knowing that all of this information is coming on with a force, what do you think this says about where HR is headed in the future? Do you think it's going to continue at this pace or slow down, or are we going to get a reprieve?
I would love to say we can all, do our shavasana at this point, but I think we're still going to need our wine for a little while longer, would be my projection. But I think it also tells us, again, as we've shared in this podcast today, being proactive, staying on top of your legislation, using your resources, not waiting and hoping that maybe it'll go away, because it's not going to. And the more you can educate your leaders on those things too, that hey, we are in a time of pretty consistent change, and we've got to be cognizant of these things. And like we talked, bringing them with you on that journey, I think that's probably my projection of where we're heading for at least the next little bit. How about you?
Agreed, wholeheartedly. With the caveat that laws shift, but values, engagement, who your workforce is as a working community, hopefully doesn't change and shift around in this onslaught. Hopefully you retain who you are as a people. Things like fairness, honesty, integrity, shared experiences. Hopefully that stays the same. So as we leave our folks today, we want you to be motivated by all of this and not overwhelmed. We're here for you. All of these resources are here for you. And just remember, you don't need to know everything.
So here's to surviving the wild, wild west in your week ahead.
My Staff connects the right people and the right companies, fast, friendly, and focused on results. From temporary staffing to executive recruitment, the My Staff team knows Nebraska business and delivers a job done right. From Norfolk to Scottsbluff, Steph Miller knows Nebraska recruiting. With more than 20 years of experience, she connects talented professionals with the companies that need them most. For your next key hire, call Steph at 402-614-1441. Whatever your hiring need or career move, My Staff is your employment partner for a job done right. Visit mystaff.com or call 402-614-1441, because at My Staff, we're not just recruiters, we're partners in your success story.